My name is Ashley, and this is Let's Talk Dispatch.
I do. You're gonna do it. Do it really well.
And I believe the world needs more dispatchers.
Around in the mud, blood, and beer.
Years that I'm not working 4th of July. 4th of July.
Say community policing, right? What about community dispatching?
So on this show, with the help of my guests, we will educate, empower, and support the heroes behind the headset. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode here on Let's Talk Dispatch with me, Ashley, the Raspy dispatcher. My guest today has over 28 years of experience in the dispatch center from various roles, call taker, dispatcher, all the way up to supervisor and director. And they're here to talk about their journey and their new role as director of program development with the Healthy Dispatcher. My guest today, Kris. Hey, Kris.
Ashley, what an honor it is to be here with you. Before we go any further, let me run these by you.
All right, hit me.
The guttural dispatcher.
The
growly dispatcher. The throaty dispatcher. One more. The croaky dispatcher. Just throwing those out there, just in case. Just throwing those out there. If you get tired of Raspy, now you've got some other places to land. From me,
those might be used by some of my units, and I'm just not aware of it. So.
I'm thrilled to be here, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for being willing to come on the show. I don't think we've met in person just yet, but I feel like I've ran into Adam a bunch at these conferences, and we got a chance to be at the Be the Difference conference. So I'm sure you were around. I just don't think we crossed paths just yet in person. But you folks are doing awesome things, and it's fun that we're going to get to talk about your journey and your journey with the Healthy Dispatcher.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it, Ashley. And, as we get started here, as I retired from my active role in a dispatch center, my dad was a school administrator for like 35 years. Mm-hmm. And when he left and retired, he was done with that industry. Like, he didn't want anything to do with it. He didn't have anything else. Like, now he runs flea market booths, which is great. I know some people want to put it all behind him, but I always felt like that was a real shame because my dad had such wisdom and experience to share with younger teachers, younger administrators. So for me, I always hoped that when I left 911 proper, I'd get the opportunity to share all the things I've been through and all the things I've learned. And man, what better way to do it than with Adam and the amazing company, the Healthy Dispatcher. I couldn't be more excited.
Oh my gosh. So cool. Well, tell us a little bit about how you got into public safety and what that was like for you.
Yeah, it's very similar probably to yours and everybody else's story. I just haven't met very many people who grew up, preparing themselves to work in 911. Almost everybody falls into it in some strange way or another, whether the job you're in isn't working out or whatever it is. So for me, as I got out of college in the very early 90s, I was an electronic media major. So I was going to get into media, and I did. I got into commercial radio for 3 years. I was a sports guy, and I did news, and I went on scene and did remotes and lots of play-by-play broadcasts and stuff like that. The first year I was like, this is great. This is radio, man. I've made it. Now, never mind, I was making $8,000 a year and no benefits. I was commercial radio. This is it. So then year 2 came along, and I was hungry. I didn't have much food. I couldn't really afford it. Oftentimes during broadcast, you'd hear my stomach creeping up into the broadcast. And I may be only slightly exaggerating. By year 3, I was living in a shack, literally. I mean, the toilet water froze in the winter in this place I was living. I just didn't have any money. And I remember my dad telling me, you got to get a government job. They have great benefits and it's hard for them to fire you. So exactly what I did. I started looking for a job, found a government job, emergency communications job. Didn't even realize it was 911 when I applied for it, and felt like, I've got a degree, I can do this. And that's kind of how I fell into it. Now, the cool thing I did get out of working in commercial radio, I met my wife there. She would be the one running the board and playing commercials and stuff while I was doing, remote broadcasts and whatnot. So it was always she and I at the radio station, like late into the night. We just got to know each other really well. And so I did get a great thing from radio. I've got a wife who I will be married to 27 years this year. So good things did come from radio, but at a certain point, it was just time to figure out how to eat. And the idea of benefits seemed like a fairly good way to go. And, government does that better than anybody. The benefits in government work are great. So, yeah, so I fell into it, had no idea what I was getting into. And lo and behold, these nearly 30 years later, here we are.
Yeah, it is funny because I think that's kind of the thought process I had. I was like, I'm really tired of not being able to afford the things that I want to afford, and real basic stuff, like nothing too extreme,
Yeah, just like a
but
loaf of bread would be awesome. Like I'd go to a friend's house and
wonderful.
I'd see bread and I'd be like, oh,
And it's true. I remember one of my other, dispatchers who retired sent an email, like a goodbye email to the center or whatever. And one of the things they said in there is like, when these jobs get hard, just kind of remember uh, the benefits that come from it. She was like a single parent, was able to buy a house, was able to, help her kids through college, like all these
yeah.
things that you don't think about when you're young and chasing your dreams and trying to figure things out. But there is definitely a level of security that comes with this line of work, certainly.
Yeah, there is. And here's the real shame. You mentioned that when you're young, you don't really think that much about it. And I'll be frank, I was 26 in 1994 when I started in 911. And, the benefits seemed like a good idea. Mostly I just needed a little bit of pay. I remember $9.91 was the starting salary. And I thought, oh, this is how the other half lives. But what's really sad is like you mentioned, young people don't really always grasp the opportunities. And I remember somebody pulling me aside when I was brand new in 911, and they said, hey, let me explain to you how this 457 plan works, this deferred compensation plan. I've got a chart I share with all new people your age. If you put this much back right now, when you retire, you'll be a millionaire. See how that works? And I remember distinctly thinking at age 26, like I'm going to care about anything in my 50s. That's literally was my thought process. So now that I'm in my 50s and not a millionaire, I'm kicking that guy in the butt. If I had a time machine, I would literally go back and kick that guy in the butt.
It's so true. Like making sure to raise the percent of what you're putting into your retirement every time you get a raise, like those little things. Because money in your pocket feels a lot better than money in the future, right? But
it does. Yeah, when you're a kid, that's all you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Like
by the way, actually, if we can just tell anybody that's in their 20s right now watching this, you're working in 911 or wherever you're working, get involved in your deferred comp plan or your 401k, whatever the heck it is. Find a way to put some dough in there. And I think Ashley and I will have done our service here for this podcast.
It's so true. I mean, I was working overtime just to pay for a couch, back when I first started. But like now, I'm working to make sure when I do finally get out of this, that I could live comfortably and well-deserved, no matter what you're doing in the world, whether it's 911 or, any other type of job. We earn our leisure. Like we deserve that time. So make sure that you are well aware of how that works, what your companies are matching, what all those percentages are, because it does matter in the end.
It does. And if you're 20 something, I'm shaking you by the lapels. You will care when you're in your 50s. I'm almost 57. I know from whence I speak. I'm shaking you. I'm done shaking you.
So true. Well, what was it like for you in the beginning? I mean, obviously we stumble into it. You didn't even know what you were signing up for. 911, that's what I signed up for. What was that like for you in the beginning?
This is horrifying, overwhelming, terrifying. Like anybody else, when I walked in, I was completely in awe that human beings could multitask in that fashion without having 8 arms, because it felt like they all had 8 arms. I remember walking in there and it was a sea of blue polyester. That's what we wore back in the early 90s.
The blues.
County, where I was. Yeah, the blue polyester. We had collar brass. And what I remember most distinctly about the blue polyester was it was terribly unflattering. If you tended toward the thin, it made you look emaciated. If you tended toward the heavy, it made you look obese. It was hot in the summer, cold in the winter, and terribly unfashionable. Having said all that, though, if they told me I had to wear that and I could, do the thing and make a little bit more money, I was willing to do that. But yeah, I was terrified. I was just constantly afraid I'm going to kill somebody. They have no business thinking I can do this because there's no way I can do this. How are these people doing what they're doing? Like I was in total awe of dispatchers. And I'm going to be honest with you, Ashley, that's something I've tried to maintain over the years. Like I've never taken that for granted, how incredible it is that people can do this job and do it as well as they can. And when you go around to dispatch centers and you see people doing the thing, yes, we take it for granted after we do it for a long time. Yes, it just becomes another job. It doesn't feel like it's anything special, but that's just not true, because it is special. And the people doing it are amazing. They're just as amazing as they seemed to me on that fall day in 1994 when I walked in freshly wearing my sparkling blue polyester and was completely blown away by what I saw. And I'm still, to this day, blown away every time I see a dispatcher doing what dispatchers do. And and a big part of it, I think, is because very few of them had any inkling a year before, 2 years before, 6 months before, that they were going to be doing a job that they have to be perfect at. So and I don't need to take anything away from firefighters or police officers. God bless them. They're unbelievable. But, a lot of times they have a sort of run up to that job where maybe they're a cop in a smaller town and then they move up. Dispatchers are, they're hawking furniture 6 months before, and then they're in a life or death job. Or I worked with a guy who was popping backs. He was a chiropractor 6 months before. And then the next thing you know, he's in a job where he cannot make a mistake and he's doing 57 things at once. Well, so I, biased though I am, as I know you are, feel like the people in our industry are extraordinary because they didn't normally always, maybe there were a few, but they didn't always have a ramp into the job. They just fell right into it, and now they're killing it. Not literally killing it.
No, but it is so true. I talk about it in the session that I just did. It's like I got degrees in criminal justice, and they prepare you to be a cop. They prepare you to go patrol. They prepare you to be in the field like that. No one prepares you for dispatching. So even if you are interested in a career as a first responder and you're thinking about it, no one talks about it. So even if you are one of the few people who have a visual into this world, you still don't know about dispatch. That's still not a relevant topic to most folks because we don't talk about it. It's not talked about enough.
No, that's totally true. And that's one of the things I love about you and others getting this out there and being so forward with it and helping us to define this for people who don't know anything about it. I mean, when you think about it, there's not really any reason for you to consider 911 unless you ever have to call it. And we hope you don't ever have to call it. It's a funny business that we do that we hope people don't ever have to use. But I think that the thing that we're seeing now, and we've been seeing kind of post-pandemic, are agencies and people advertising this as a possibility for a job, for a career, educating people about what 911 is in bigger and better ways than have ever been done before. And I think as a former director who was, desperate for people like so many of us are, finding new ways to get out in front and let, for example, high school kids who don't know what they want to do know that, 911 is a legitimate career choice that maybe you don't know anything about, because chances are they don't. So I love this kind of new push. And I say new, I know a lot of people around the country I've talked to have been doing this for a long time, but relatively new push to just get 911 education out there as a career choice for people. And I'm really excited about that. And hopefully we can shine a light on something that's just not that well known. I mean, I've talked to so many people that work in 911. They're like, I went on the city job site and I applied for all the jobs I thought I was qualified for. And I just found 911. Well, what if we create a world where people are looking for it? I mean, that's a kind of a fantasy land, but I think that's got to be the goal.
It's so true. I mean, and I'm me, I'm all for it. The world needs more dispatchers.
Absolutely.
It's definitely a big disservice that we're not having this conversation, having this, even for the education portion of it, is that the everyday citizen having just a baseline understanding of the realities of our technology, the realities of the work we're doing, in these cities where our centers are understaffed, why they're waiting on hold for so long, those things. And it creates a better relationship or partnership between the caller and the call taker, because that's what we're building when we answer 911 is a partnership. We're working together during this really weird time for you who are calling, because you don't call every day. I'm answering this call and we're just trying to get through it the best we can with the most information as possible, providing the most reassurance to the caller. And the more education that we have behind that, the better that conversation's going to be during that extremely stressful time for the caller.
Yeah. And I think the more aware of 911 across all spectrums that people are, the better for everyone involved. Like a lot of times when you call, for example, your satellite company or your cell phone company, you don't even think you're talking to a human. It becomes so automated and your expectations are so low. So in 911, it's not that hard to exceed, by the way, expectations that people have of government employees. But I worked for a city manager once that said your goal should always be to exceed that low bar. You can do that. So anytime we start to educate people about who we are, we're human beings doing a job, we're first responders. Yes, we are first responders. And it's a job that you can also do legitimately. And guess what? We need you. We're hiring. Never thought about it? Now's the time. Come sit in. Come attend some educational events. Maybe we can put on little clinics for people who are interested or little classes for high school juniors and seniors to start to get them prepared. And we start opening up doors in a lot of different ways. And that's happening because of people like you, Ashley, and because of people who are so forward-thinking, directors and managers and others in dispatch centers across the country who are becoming proactive because they have to be. But also it's an evolution that we're seeing of 911 in that people are becoming much, much more aware of not only it, but the people behind it than ever before. It's great to see. It's
really wonderful to watch and to be a part of. Do you remember any of your early calls or first calls for service when you were getting into this line of work?
It's funny, and I think you'll identify with this. I think most people in our industry identify with this. When you are brand new, man, those first few months, you're going home and people are like, did you take any weird calls? And you've got this encyclopedic knowledge of every call you took. I took this one call and I took this other call. But then after you've done it for a year or 3 or 5, people are like, hey, what's the strangest call you've ever taken? And you're just like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't really know. I really don't know. Having said that, though, I do remember some of my very early calls, particularly my mistakes. Like I remember making awful mistakes. One mistake I made where I sent fire units to a church fire, but I put the wrong directional in the street. It was east instead of west. Didn't realize I'd done it. And that one still sticks with me. So calls like that. I remember taking my first really, really awful critical incident. I've written about it recently for the Healthy Dispatcher about how we all are changed and we all find out what we're capable of when we take that first critical incident involving a child. And so I remember taking my first child call in the spring, was as residences start opening their pools, inevitably we get calls about kids in the pool. And I took one of those calls, little 2-year-old floating in a pool. And it was bracing. And I think it served to let me know, like it does for all of us, whether or not this was something I truly could do. And I found at that moment that, it's something I was capable of doing. And that was back in the days before we had formal peer support of any sort. Like back in the 90s, if you were struggling from a call that you took, everybody said, oh, just get back in there. What are you going to do? It's not like you can go home. Like they didn't really consider it something that was legit. I'm glad we've come a long way in that regard. But that one, I remember, so I do remember mistake calls, but I also remember like the first calls where I felt like I really was making a difference for people. Like they were super upset. Like I took a call from a lady who was in a closet one time and she was, I can't talk because there's somebody in my house. Oh my God, I can hear them. Oh my God. And like you could hear noise in the background. And I'm like, oh my God, somebody's breaking in and I'm going to be on the phone with her. I'm making a difference. And then she's like, oh my God. It's my son. He's home from college. Never mind. Thank you. And hangs up. So I remember calls like that and just learning the ropes of what real emergencies are versus the silly ones. And after a period of time though, they just all blur together like they do for all of us.
They really do. And I remember I had a call like that and it ended up being the little robot vacuums that were cleaning in the middle of the night. They could hear it downstairs, it was moving around, but it was a robot vacuum.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. I had one like that. There was a guy on the roof and it was a raccoon.
Yeah.
Had that one. They're I love it when they turn out to just be silly.
Yes. No, 1,000%. And it's always funny. I did a recent post recently about the bridge collapsing in Baltimore.
Right.
And it is one of those things, this job is just so unique in the fact, all first responders probably connect or feel with this, is that you're paid to be able to respond to this thing that you aren't necessarily trained on. Like I'm sure those dispatchers were never really trained what to do when a bridge collapses, because
Yeah.
how often does a bridge actually collapse? September
Right.
11th, how often do planes run into buildings? There usually isn't any protocol for these events that are once in a lifetime or once in a century. But when the thing does happen, the expectation is you have enough training and enough, right way of thinking and do this job to act appropriately. And that's kind of the reality that we're living in this line of work.
And isn't it, we were talking just a second ago about how extraordinary people in 911 are, biased though we may be. But isn't that your definitive piece of proof right there, that you can take someone who literally was a chiropractor in their past, and now they've, taken a series of calls that maybe prepare them to a degree for certain calls like the ones they've taken, and then they get a call like that, and they're extraordinary on the call, and they do unbelievable things, and they keep their cool, and they take that human element, the one that any other human being outside of 911 would go, and do all the normal things that humans would do, but they're able to park that so that they can be empathetic and efficient and great and ask the right questions and get the call entered. It's superhero stuff, actually. It is legitimately the stuff of extraordinary achievement done by extraordinary people. And so, when you think about calls like that, and can you possibly be trained to take a call that, hey, a plane just flew into the building here in front of me? No, there's no amount of training that will necessarily prepare you. And yet the people of 911 rise to the occasion like that time and time and time again. And it's all inspiring. It really is.
Yeah, no, it really truly is. And I mean, you've been in the center for, we talked a little before, you're almost at 30 years of experience now here in October, which is amazing. Time flies so fast in this line of work. And what you are doing now, we'll talk a little bit more about the Healthy Dispatcher in a little bit, but specifically about wellness and peer support and, self-care, all of those things from when you started to now. How has that shift looked for you, especially since you're so involved in that currently?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because one of the coolest things about doing something for a long period of time is not so much that at the end of it, you're so wise or so great. You've experienced a lot, but that doesn't make you any better or wiser than anybody else. But what it does do is serve to remind you of the seismic changes that have taken place. And nowhere in our industry, since I started in 1994 until now, have changes occurred more than in the wellness piece. When, again, in the 90s, there was no wellness for dispatchers. We certainly weren't considered first responders. We were absolutely administrative support for people who were on the scene. That's all we were, that we were treated that way. And we, to a degree, accepted that that's who we were. And there was no help for us. There was no belief that we suffered from critical incident stress in 911. How could you? You're just taking the call. That's nothing. We're out on the scene. You're not out on the scene. Sadly, that line of thinking pervades in some circles to this day. Having said that, though, it became obviously recognized that, you know what? Yes, when you hear a mother suffering from absolutely raw anguish at seeing her child not breathing, or when you talk to an elderly woman whose husband of 70 years is laying deceased beside her, you feel that, and it affects you just like it does if you're on the scene. Yes, we are trained to put it aside. Yes, we are trained to be emotionless. But so many times, Ashley, as you have, I'm sure, I would see a steely dispatcher take that call, hang up, and then their head would fall, and they would feel the emotions that everybody feels, that every normal human feels. So to see peer support and the understanding and recognition of critical incident stress in 911 begin to move forward in the 2000s, and for it to be taken seriously, and for us to be treated like the first responders that we are, has been a wonderful thing to watch. It felt like it happened too slow when I was living it, and frankly, it did. But it's happened, it's happening, and those steps they're just enormous. From 1994 of, oh, Kris, get back in there. It's not like you can't take this. You're just answering the call, to 2024, when we have specialized teams who proactively reach out to our responders our first responders after a critical incident to make sure they're okay and put them through the paces necessary to help them get back in the game the right way. It's been amazing. It's been an amazing thing to watch. The only thing that's even sort of close to that is the incredible leaps that I've seen in technology over the last 30 years. But the human side, it's been wonderful to see. Still a lot of work to do. It's not done by any means. But man, it's been great to see dispatchers get treated and be helped the way that they should.
Yeah, and I mean, it's true. I started 6 years ago, and I remember we had a specific day, pretty much a full learning day, where our peer support team came in and they gave a whole presentation about, coping correctly and not using alcohol or other substances in order to deal with the trauma that we're hearing. And, that was 6 years ago, and how beneficial just a conversation like that would have been, I would imagine, for folks who were starting when you were starting, and just knowing that we had these options available to us from the start of our career, from the beginning of our academy, leading into this line of work, I believe is so helpful, because you just never know what the thing is going to be that gets you. I mean, what bothers you on a call, Kris, is going to be different than what bothers me on a call.
Yes.
Vice versa. And sometimes, the thing that Kris is bothered by doesn't faze me at all. But we don't need to both be upset by the call in order for it to be valid. Like, if it's bothering you, then we should be able to receive some care and some direction to help us work through those things.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word valid there, Ashley, because a lot of times you feel like, as sort of a caretaker, which we are in 911, that your job is to make sure everybody else is okay. God forbid you think about yourself. So we've got this hard armor that we feel like protects us, when in fact it's pierced all the time. And I think a lot of dispatchers, certainly back in the day, were kind of afraid to admit that. Like, there was a feeling that I would show weakness if I show that I'm affected. These people I'm taking care of, that's who matter. And they didn't feel like their feelings were necessarily valid, their responses to the calls they were taking. But creating that sense of validity, that it's okay to feel the way you feel, and there's help for you when you do. Like, one of the worst calls I ever took, and this would not necessarily mean a thing to anybody else, I'd gotten my wife a basset hound named Bernadette, went for her 21st birthday, and she was our daughter. That dog was our daughter for years. We doted over her. And even though her feet smelled like wet Fritos, we loved that dog, long ears and all. Well, she passed away. She was 12 years old, and we were just devastated by it. I go back to work. Just a couple weeks, I went to work right after, but a couple weeks after going back to work, an officer keyed up on the radio while I was dispatching, and I could hear a dog screaming in the background. And the officer says, "Can you get animal control out here? I've got a basset hound that's been hit." And Ashley, I couldn't get my breath. Like, I couldn't form a word. I had to get somebody, and I was a seasoned, ice in my veins dispatcher at this point. I had to get somebody to come sit down for me and go gather myself. And the atmosphere in my center at that point was accepting of that. Like, it's okay. And you need to talk to peers. And it was so wonderful to have that. They didn't make me feel smaller or weird or less than, because that was my critical incident at the time. So I love the word valid in that, because it's key that we treat every reaction to everything we are feeling in our centers as valid, and then deal with it.
Exactly. The level of support, I think, just continues to rise. The level of awareness continues to rise with, stuff like Let's Talk Dispatch, stuff like the Healthy Dispatcher. All of this just continues to create atmospheres, letting folks know, we feel the things, we, need the support as well. And it allows people to be people in these centers. And I know a lot of times, dispatchers, we're in this really weird line of work where I think that is a little different than our officers and our patrols and our part of that. If they don't come to work, they can kind of fill in the gap. Someone else can work their beat. Someone else can pull a little extra paper.
Well, they can run a beat short if they need to.
They can run a beat short if they need to. If I call out, someone else's day is ruined because they got to come in. Like, it's a little different in that aspect. So I think, have a lot of times guilt when it comes to taking care of ourselves, when even if we're like legitimately sick, or we need a mental health day, or something's going on that we can't be at work, there is a hesitation. I still have it, and I think I'm a very empowered person in regards to taking my time. I believe in it, I advocate for it, that's what it's there for. But I do acknowledge the fact that it's a very unique setup we have with our scheduling and our 24-hour support, and someone needs to be in these seats that's different than our patrol counterparts, that cause us to sometimes put ourselves physically on the back burner because we don't want to ruin someone else's time off. We don't want to short our center. We don't want to put that stress on someone to fill our shift.
Yeah, and that was, as a director, that was the hardest thing during COVID that I ran into. I got the director's gig in 2019. COVID hit right after I got it. And
Yeah, there you go.
yeah, with a great introduction to, hey, welcome to director. But trying to get my folks to acknowledge, if you got the sniffles, stay home. Like most dispatchers, not all, but most dispatchers will come to work no matter what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
I mean, so to get people to stay home when they had a stuffy nose was asking people to take a degree of care for themselves that they just weren't accustomed to. They're like, I'm not staying home with a stuffy nose. Somebody's vacation is going to get canceled. So they were really, ramped up in that whole, I've got to be in my seat, most of them, or somebody's going to pay for it. So getting people to just truthfully say, I'm not feeling great, I better stay home during COVID. That was the hardest part in our center, was getting these tough as nails dispatchers to take a little better care of themselves, like they needed to, or we were all going to be sick. So it was quite a thing. That's a whole nother podcast.
Oh, it's true. It is. And it's like you call and you're like, even like COVID specifically, you're testing positive and you're like, what do you mean I have to be out for like 10 days? Like that's insane. Like that's wild. And there is just a degree of like, sometimes you gotta take the time, you gotta take care of yourself so we can continue to take care of others, of course.
Yep, absolutely.
So tell us about the Healthy Dispatcher. How did this all come about? How did you get involved in it, and what you folks are doing with it?
Man, I am so happy to talk about the Healthy Dispatcher. And first and foremost, if anybody that's watching this in all likelihood has either had a class with Adam Tim, knows who Adam Tim is. Adam is the founder of the Healthy Dispatcher. The story of how Adam founded this company is one for the movies. The guy is a dyed-in-the-wool entrepreneur who has put a focus on a career in his passion. And so when I retired, the opportunity arose to get to come to work with Adam. And I can't tell you what an absolute thrill it is to get to be a part of this incredible company. And so what we do is you may see us at conferences. Adam and I are often at conferences teaching, but we also come out to your center and we will teach classes of all sorts and just try to share the experiences that we've had. We've talked about my experience. Adam was a 10-year Los Angeles police dispatcher, really interesting experience there. And we just get the opportunity to get out into these centers and conferences and out with these dispatchers and share our experience, share our thoughts, and just try to help where help is needed. And it is just an empowering, amazing job for an absolutely amazing company. Now, I will say, because I'm friendly with virtually everyone, that there are a lot of great companies that are servicing dispatch centers in various ways, whether it's training or what have you. Some great folks out here doing some great work. But to get the opportunity to work with somebody like Adam for a company like the Healthy Dispatcher is an honor that if you would have told me about it 5 years ago, I would have laughed at you. I would have said there's no possible way that's going to happen. But I am a longtime college public speaking teacher who has been out teaching and presenting for years. And to get the opportunity to put skills to work that absolutely are my favorite things in the world to do with my very favorite people in the world, dispatchers, with my very favorite company in the world, the Healthy Dispatcher and Adam Tim, is a thrill among thrills. I just love it. And as a registered yoga instructor, I even at times get to teach yoga at conferences and stuff like that under the Healthy Dispatcher banner, which is also a real treat. So yeah, the timing was just such that the opportunity arose right at the time I was leaving the city. I knew I wanted to continue my career in 911, if not in the center, certainly on the periphery, and to get to do it in this way is endlessly endlessly rewarding.
Isn't it great when like the things we're passionate about kind of combine with 911 and just finds a way to impact people, the way it impacted us? It's such a wonderful thing to witness, watching folks create things that impact this specific niche and community is always, always wonderful to watch and support.
Oh, it's everything. And again, it's virtually my entire adult life. I've been a dispatcher, save for those few years as a baby adult when I was working in commercial radio, but it's in my blood. And if you do this job for any length of time, and I'm talking 2, 3, 4 years, it gets in your blood. Like I talk to people all the time who left dispatch careers after just a few years and they've never stopped thinking about it. It's never stopped impacting who they are and how they think of the world. Oftentimes they still eat super fast just because they learned to do that at the console, and that's not something you ever stop doing. It just gets inside you. And I was fortunate enough to work with really supportive, wonderful people over the years, by and large, who helped me realize that not only was this a worthwhile career that I could be good at, but that it really meant something. I've never lost track of that. And so sharing that passion with dispatchers, with the Healthy Dispatcher, it's everything. I get a chance to record. We do a weekly Healthy Dispatcher THD training minute. We publish those every week, and that's something I do for the company. I write for the company. And again, I go out and teach classes and do yoga, and it's just everything. And it's not about me. Like, one of the things about working in radio that I discovered is you'd occasionally bump into a person or two in radio who were just pure ego. And you could tell the only reason they were in radio is because they wanted people to hear their voice. Well, the cool thing about working with a Healthy Dispatcher is it's not about ego. It's about taking what we know, what we've learned, and our experiences, and trying to continue to help with them. And and it works. And we all need the help in our dispatch centers. We all need to talk to people who've been through it and can help us think of things in new ways or bounce ideas off of. So yeah, it's super exciting. I tell Adam all the time that I'm thrilled to be working with him, and he's become like a brother to me. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. Quick funny story about Adam. I first met him a few years ago when I was working at 911 and no thought about working with him. And I just briefly met him and shook his hand, and I went back to my dispatch center. I said, "Man, that guy's a douche." And they were like, "Well, like how so?" And I said, "I can just tell he's a douche. I can just tell. All full of himself. I can just tell." Which that whole judgment of Adam after a brief few minutes had everything to do with my insecurities and nothing to do with who he is. And I've told him this story, by the way, and he gets a kick out of it. And I've gotten to know Adam. Here's what you find out. And many of you who know Adam already know this. He is confident, but extraordinarily humble. He is driven and dedicated to the betterment of this industry, period. End of story. That is what it's about. And he's so genuine, and it's so infectious to be around him and be a part of that and get to share in his passion, even though initially I thought he was a douche. He is not a douche. I was a douche for thinking he was a douche without even getting to know him. But yeah, so he's a great dude. It's a great company, and it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to take all these years of worthless knowledge that are swimming around in my head and use them for good going forward. And I don't plan to stop. And I told Adam this when he hired me. I said, you've hired a senior citizen here, pal, and I don't plan to stop doing this anytime soon. So he's going to be ready to tend to my needs as I age. He knows this.
That's excellent. Well, you guys are putting out some great stuff, and like you said, it is all about the betterment of the industry. All of these conversations we're having, all of these sessions we're having, that's a wonderful part about dispatch conferences where we tend to cross paths is people sharing their experiences and being able to learn from one another in order to better their centers that they're currently working in. That's magic that happens at these conferences. And you folks partnered with the Denise Amber Lee Foundation at the Be the Difference conference, which was one of the most educational forward conferences that I've witnessed. Your guys' workbook that was put together, which is so intentional with the need to learn. Like, this is about bringing information back to your centers to make it better. And the fact that you guys are focusing on the healthy dispatcher part of that is so needed and so appreciated, I would imagine, by anyone who's run across you or gone to one of your sessions.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the Be the Difference conference, Ashley. It's our baby. We couldn't be prouder of it. In 2025, we're heading back to Myrtle Beach, and it'll be our third year for the conference, getting to partner with the incredible people at the Denise Amber Lee Foundation, almost all of whom are like family to me. It's just a wonderful, wonderful conference. And the feedback that we get from people who go to it is, it feels like I'm with family when I'm there. It feels very close knit, and it feels like we are there to get things done that we can literally take back to our centers with us. The feedback's been incredible. And it's just been such an honor to be a part of a conference like that. And we find that people are just in desperate need of finding each other. Like one of your best, absolutely best resources in this industry, and it's one that people find not as often as you'd think, each other. And that's the point of conferences. That's the point of getting together with people in the industry or listening to a podcast like this, is that you may find that all these issues that you've had in your center that are keeping you up at night, that you were convinced there was no good answer to, are being solved by people doing your job in other centers. So to get a chance to hobnob with them, get to know them, pick their brains about what's going on in their centers, can not only get you some great new friends with slightly inappropriate senses of humor, it can also provide really amazing answers to problems you didn't think there were answers to. So just being a part of this company and helping to connect people in our industry so that they can share the knowledge that they have with each other, that maybe is the best part of all of it.
It really truly is. And for folks who are listening, they're still at their consoles. They're still, like me, probably trying to practice some self-care during shift work. Is there any tidbit or advice or something small that you can give to folks that maybe you've learned from your yoga practice or any other wellness stuff that you folks are putting on that they can implement at their console to just kind of help them throughout a shift?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind, Ashley. I appreciate you asking that question. Number one, breathe. Learn how to take a second and breathe. Take big, deep breaths in, close your eyes for a second, let the breath go. One of the things that we teach in yoga is that every time we take a breath, we focus that breath into stress, whether it's a physical stress or a mental stress. So I tell people, when you take a breath and you close your eyes, you don't have to have much time or be up from your console. Focus that breath either into the stress that you're going through with the job. Maybe you've got a sore back, whatever it is. Focus that breath into that stress. And as you let that breath go, let the stress go with it. And I know that sounds super new agey and super unhelpful to those who don't practice it, but breath practice into stress can make a huge difference. So I really teach a lot of that in my yoga practice, and I encourage dispatchers to learn how to breathe. And I would also suggest to let go of the things that you've done before. Like a lot of times dispatchers, and I know I was guilty of this, get caught up in the call before or the mistake that they made yesterday or whatever it was that came before. I'm a big football fan, although I'm a Denver Broncos fan, so it can be debated as to whether or not it's actual football at this point. And I saw a cornerback, and a cornerback, if you're not familiar, those are the guys that guard wide receivers. They try to keep them from catching the ball. The wide receiver knows where the ball is going to be, so most of the time they win that matchup. And even the best cornerbacks will tell you, if you get caught up on the catch that you blew before, they're going to burn you again the next time. So I try to tell dispatchers, think in terms of a cornerback in the NFL. You're going to have moments that don't go like you want them to, or maybe you make a mistake that's eating you up. Learn how to A, own it so you can get better from it. But most importantly, B, put it behind you and focus on what's in front of you. A trainer told me once, hey, Kris, you could be the best dispatcher in the world for 6 years, but you're only as good as that next 911 call you take, that next perimeter you set up on the radio, or the next response you have to an officer that's in trouble on the radio. Doesn't matter what you did yesterday, matters what you did today. So I always tell dispatchers, I always coach them, let go of the bad stuff, focus on now.
That's such great advice. I mean, it really truly is, because you're going to have the hundreds of calls in between, depending on what kind of center you work at, between the last mistake and what you're doing currently. So you definitely got to pick up and move forward for sure.
I mean, you're going to make mistakes. I always tell people too, I'm a baseball fan. Ted Williams was a great hitter, perhaps the greatest hitter in the history of baseball. He hit 400. So in baseball terms, if you're not a baseball fan, if you hit 300, you're a Hall of Famer. If you hit 400, you're like not human.
Yeah.
And even then, 400 means you are failing 6 out of 10 times. So when you take 100 calls, 500 calls, 1,000 calls, as many of our veteran dispatchers have, there are going to be errors. There just are. And I know we hold ourselves in 911 to an outrageously high bar. I'm glad that we do. We need to, but it can take its toll. And one of the tolls that it takes is not allowing us to be okay with learning from the occasional mistakes that we are going to make. They're going to happen. That's not the goal. We don't want them to, but they're going to. So figuring out a way to own them, learn from them, because you can learn a lot more from the mistakes than you can from the good stuff, and then put them behind us and move forward. That is a huge, huge element to a lasting, long career in 911.
1,000%. If folks want to reach out to the Healthy Dispatcher, catch a class, bring you guys out to a center, how do they get in contact with you?
Well, they can reach out to info@thehealthydispatcher.com. It's info@thehealthydispatcher.com and inquire about what they would like. They can also come to our webpage, thehealthydispatcher.com. Follow us on all socials at The Healthy Dispatcher. On our webpage, you'll find classes that we offer. You can reach out to us. Let us know what it is that you're looking for. We love coming out to centers to teach. I've already had some really awesome experiences this year across the country. We have many more to come. Adam and I will be at the Navigator Conference coming up. We'll be at the Texas Public Safety Conference together coming up. So we get a chance, as we're kind of hopscotching across the country and missing each other, we're going to get a chance to work together here coming up. So we're really excited about that. And we've got some other gigs as well. But if you'd like us to come out to your center, we've got some great classes that we offer. We would really love to come out and see you. Reach out to us, info@thehealthydispatcher.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to come see you.
Awesome. And I'll include all that in the description of the video as well, or the episode. So don't worry too much about having to write all that down. But thehealthydispatcher.com, it's pretty easy to remember. And I'm sure you can find all that contact information on there as well. Well, Kris, as we start to wrap it up, the last question that I tend to ask everybody is, what advice would you give someone who's considering a career as a dispatcher?
Well, first of all, I thank you, Ashley, for having me. And for dispatchers, I first and foremost tip my cap to you. And I would ask you, as you go forward in your career, and hopefully you go forward in the career, because it's very much worth doing, even though at times, especially early on, it feels like we're asking you to do the impossible. You'll do it, but learn to give yourself a little bit of grace, because you're doing a brutally difficult job that, to be frank, most people cannot do. They can't. I've forgotten the names of all the people who washed out or quit in my old 911 center. So give yourself a little grace and give yourself a little credit, and learn to pat yourself on the back, and learn to understand that you are really special for choosing and doing well in a job that asks so much of you, from the hours to the calls that you take, to the hours. I think it's worth repeating multiple times. Incredibly special people in this field. I was so privileged to work with them, and I miss my people so much. It's the hardest part of retiring and leaving my center, is missing those people that were like family to me. I've had a lot of fun getting new family members across the country, but I really miss my people. But yeah, my advice to anyone in this field, first of all, thank you for getting into it. Second of all, give yourself the chance to be great at it, because you will. And lastly, give yourself a little grace as you go forward. It's okay that you make the occasional mistake. You aren't perfect, even though you're darn close to it. And what you do is pretty darn special. And I hope you get a second or two along the road to step back and realize that.
Awesome. Such great advice. Kris, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your journey, telling the world about the Healthy Dispatcher. And I really do appreciate it.
Ashley, the pleasure was 1,000% mine. And again, I thank you so much for doing what you do to help people know a little bit more about this job, this crazy career field that we're all in. I know it's making a difference for people. I know it's helping dispatchers feel much more seen, and hopefully it'll open the door for others to perhaps explore a career in a field that desperately needs them.
Awesome. Well, again, Kris, thank you, and I'll be right back with you. All right, everybody, that was another amazing episode here on Let's Talk Dispatch with the Healthy Dispatcher with Kris. Thank you so much for coming out, sharing your journey, sharing the awesome work that you folks are doing at the Healthy Dispatcher. Again, check out thehealthydispatcher.com. We love talking to any company that's doing good work for dispatchers specifically and first responders in general, because we need more dispatchers and we need folks who are currently in these seats to be supported, to know they're not alone, and to have tools to practice self-care. So if you haven't checked them out, make sure to follow them on all their socials, check out their website. And of course, until next time, stay raspy, everybody. Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Dispatch podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're interested in becoming a guest on the show, or maybe even submitting your own story, you can do all that and more at theraspydispatcher.com. Until next time, stay raspy.